Listening to the silences, post-leadership and the enabling of followership. This presentation is for the Global Listening Festival. It's been written and delivered by Brabazon. I play leadership bingo. I have a bingo card that I carry into every meeting. It has 16 words and phrases on it. And those words and phrases are optics, disruption, baked in, socialise the document, circle back, touch base, blue sky thinking, close the loop, going forwards, drilling back, game changer, low-hanging fruit, right-sizing, incentivising, paradigm shift, and giving 110%. So in every meeting I hover with my big red marker and I confirm with a stroke of a pen the incompetence and meaninglessness of leadership in our lives. Yes, one bingo card at a time. The old joke used to be, why did you run this meeting when you could have sent an email? Well, we've moved on now. Why did you send this email when you could have simply had a thought bubble and kept it to yourself? So for the Global Listening Conference, the Global Listening Festival, I want to offer a presentation that is derived from a new project that I've been working on for about a decade. That project is post-leadership. I want to explore how leadership and its attendant cliches are really the last thing that we need at the moment. Leadership in contemporary public and private organisations is failing. But through this failure, leadership has never been discussed more. Indeed, there is an inverted relationship between the number of times a leader talks about leadership and their actual capacity to lead. Jean Baudrillard predicted this through his conceptualisation of the double refusal. In the Shadow of the Silent Majorities and the Agony of Power, he investigated the role of the masses and what he described as, quote, the end of the social, end of quote. Baudrillard offers a unique theory of power, incorporating what he calls a double refusal. By the double refusal, he means the sovereign's refusal to dominate as well as the subject's refusal to be dominated. The double refusal provides a framework to understand the irrationality and the denial of power. A leader cannot lead, and citizens refuse to be led. This is the double refusal. In this space of ambivalence, anger and refusal exist the terms on my leadership bingo card. The pointlessness is masked by game changers, incentivising, low-hanging fruit, disruption and socialising the document. Instead of filling the space of the double refusal with banality, with incompetence and with confusion, my presentation validates silence as a sorbet to create a post-leadership culture of listening and followership. Through this century, we've seen embarrassing, shameful, banal, ignorant moments. The racism and xenophobia are too overt, distasteful and grotesque. The unsayable becomes normalised, becomes banal, and is allowed to grow and thrive and breed. Semiotic violence is contagious, virulent, and passionate in its banality, but it must not be normalised. This is not business as usual. Therefore, talking in cliches and buzzwords is not only an inelegant proxy for leadership, it actually blocks leadership. Therefore, my presentation for the Global Listening Festival today summons and activates an alternative. Silence speaks. In Baudrillard's double refusal is located silence. But the meanings in and from this silence are unclear. My presentation has two parts today. The first is silence. The second is followership. Let's start with silence. Most of the emails I receive are filled with fear, frightened about the future, filled with despair. What do we do in an impossible situation with irrational leaders, bizarre rules, where there's actually no way to fight the power? The answer is, of course, silence. So let's think about the power of silence by starting with its opposite. We've all been there. We've been in this damn meeting and these third-rate randoms start and dominate the session, and they dominate the meeting talking about themselves, talking about their career narrative, taking over half the meeting talking about themselves. This problem has increased in frequency in the last few years. But instead of people sort of going around a table or around a Zoom meeting and giving their name, "Hi, Tara, how you going?" These third-rate randoms launch into a monologue. "Let me tell you about how amazing I am and my brilliant career and why, of course, I'm so much better than you." Of course, these third-rate randoms prove the exact opposite, that they're a minor person with a minor career at a minor university and no one actually cares. The truth of my life is that the best people, the greatest scholars in the world, never pump themselves up. They never talk and talk and talk about their supposed achievements. They are quiet because their work speaks for itself. But it is always difficult to know what to do in these situations where the randoms just launch into that career narrative like they're Noam Chomsky at an anarcho-syndicalist conference. Now I simply refuse to play this game. I sit in silence, I do not validate this nonsense, and I do not make them feel comfortable in their delusions. This silence is a way to refocus and reorganise. And certainly COVID increased the visuality of our lives, but it's also increased the role of silence as resistance. Think about how many Zoom or Skype or Teams meetings we've all experienced where people in the room had their screens off, they had their microphones off, so a group had completely disengaged. They're present, but not really. They are disconnected and they are resisting through this disconnection. They are present but absent. Digitisation enables us all to disconnect the visual at ease. But what about sound? Our oral life is different from our visual life. The cliche "seeing is believing" gives us a sense of how the eye and visuality dominate how we learn, how we think, and how we interpret. So let's shake this truth up a little bit. Thinking about our personal and professional lives, how would your identity, how would your relationships change if we focused on the information provided by our ears rather than by our eyes? After the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century and the growth of both urbanisation and cities, it was almost impossible to find silence. Silence is rare, and actually the right to be silent is one of the greatest statements of power that we have. When noise and sound is everywhere, silence is a statement of power and authority. But silence remains defiant. Its power is clear, but its meaning is not. Sivaram Vemuri in 2019 produced a powerful book titled Managing Silence in Workplaces. For Vemuri, he locates the, quote, costs of silence, end of quote, and, quote, the need to manage silence, end of quote. Silence was an obstruction for Vemuri in managing a workplace. So for leaders, silence is a problem. So why did he make such an argument? Well, he argues that silence kills, his word, kills inclusive workplaces, innovation in organisations and transformations in workplaces. So silence was and is a problem for workplaces. But Vemuri has assigned a meaning to silence. Silence is detrimental to workplace productivity and efficiency, so it's a proxy for a lack of workplace engagement. Vermeury stated, quote, "Silence is itself a form of communication," end of quote. But the point I want to note is we can never really be certain what this means, what this silence means. Assumptions about the neoliberal workplace cannot be generalised. All the attention in our workplaces is granted to the loudest people, those who voice their opinions. But how do we grant time and meaning to those who are silent? And the answer is they're ignored. There are tangible and intangible costs to ignoring silence, ignoring the problem, the challenge, the issues that emerge in and from silence. And those costs include employee turnover, quiet quitting, mental health concerns, litigation, and decreased productivity. So this way of thinking about silence configures us, as humans, as a source of economic growth. We are resources for business. But of course, we are all so much more than that. Silence confirms that humans are more than workers. So let me show you what I mean. When I was 18 years old, yes, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, I read Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse. How distinctive, how original. But I always remember her paragraph on silence, quote, "For now she needs not think of anybody. She could be herself, by herself, and that was what she now often needed to feel, to think, well, not even to think, to be silent, to be alone. All the being and the doing, expansive, glittering, vocal, evaporated, and one shrunk with a sense of solemnity to being oneself, a wedge-shaped core of darkness, something invisible to others. And this self, having shed its attachments, was free for the strangest adventures." End of quote. There is an ethics to silence, and the ethical question of silence emerges when we avoid defining it prescriptively. By that, I mean silence is diverse, deep and complex in its definitions. Those in power claim the silence and give it meaning, so that gives silence a prescriptive and indeed pejorative meaning. The point is, silence is ignored and marginalised most of the time. Silence is only seen and heard if we pay attention to it. In other words, until we actually notice silence, it doesn't exist. As Villas and Vermeury have stated, quote, "Often silence is not noticed until it is too late." End of quote. If we do not place attention on silence and those who express it, it ends in depression, resentment, anger, self-harm, destructive working environments, suicide and domestic violence. You see, our world is noisy. Fast communication, information silos and echo chambers, voter apathy and a hardening of extreme viewpoints, often without evidence. Power operates through noise, sound and the voice. Most famously, think about how power operates in a court of law. Silence in the court. Why is silence necessary? Well, silence has to be controlled so that power can be confirmed through words. But this overt control suggests silence is pervasive, unpredictable and troubling. Silence exists in spaces. The thing about spaces is that mostly we don't know they exist. Our culture wants clean binaries, black and white, men and women, straight and gay, manager and worker, supervisor and student, teacher and student. And of course, life is not like that. Meaning happens in the spaces. Silence happens in the spaces. The act of recognising silence is important for so many citizens, but incredibly important for Indigenous, First Nation and First Peoples. Bilas and Vamori located 6 modes of silence. Insolent silence, silence as hopelessness, silence of the oppressed, silence of fear, silence of attentive listening, and silence which makes space for dialogue. But you see, significantly in their categories, they left out silence and resistance. Silence as resistance. This resistance can be used to hold ground, hold a position, to not give approval, to not give a particular view or person respect. Silence is a coping strategy in our present. But our present lives, our working lives, our professional lives, our personal lives require a different type of refusal, a refusal to participate. And this refusal offers a pause, a way to heal, a way to find alternative pathways, a way to think about a different future. As Hall, Kovabayas and Kirchbaum have confirmed, communication is situational, but quietness is important. If we think about it, language determines how we perceive and frame the world. We speak our reality. Silence has a different role in the configuration of social relationships because we use speech to create and maintain and transform our interpersonal relations. Silence also has a role in relationship management or destruction. Silence can be a way to avoid conflict or pain or trauma. Think about the phrase, the silent treatment, as a way to respond to antagonism. Silence can also hold a moment, place a relationship in stasis until we as individuals know what's going on. But silence is also a critique, a statement that an individual will not participate. It is an act of refusal. When our experience transcends speech, we must activate the work of silence and the world of silence. Maggie Ross described, quote, the simmering conflict between hierarchy and silence, end of quote. Speech is valued, silence is suppressed. So what we need, therefore, is to enable what Schaefer described as, quote, the recovery of positive silence, end of quote. Raymond Murray Schaefer died on August 14, 2021, and therefore it seems so appropriate as we're nearing the 3rd anniversary of his death to remember his career. Born in 1933, he moved the mind furniture of multiple scholarly generations through his World Soundscape project. So studying a soundscape makes us think about how sound creates a sense of place. Schaefer was a writer, a composer. He was interested in a sonic ecology, connecting the maker of the sound with the sound made. He called for experimental music, or ear cleaning, and wanted to develop what he called the thinking ear. For those of us that learn and work in our universities, we are what Schaefer describes as, quote, ear witnesses, end of quote, to the changing relationship between information and knowledge, teaching and learning, research and ignorance, social justice and neoliberalisms. We do not yet possess the sonic literacy to interpret the fear and the redundancy and the loss through restructure after restructure after restructure as our colleagues are discarded, as their expertise is maligned. We also don't have the sonic literacy to understand the seething silence and institutional inaction from decades of sexual harassment and sexual assault and research misconduct of appropriating the research of others and adding authors to research with which they had minimal or no involvement. But if we listen with consciousness, if we summon that thinking ear and recognise the sound marks of our time, then suddenly our world changes. For those of us sick of fighting, sick of listening to nonsense, sick of people lacking expertise, sick of hearing irrationality, silence offers a space for reflection, a pause to enable a restart. We're not offering respect. We are not offering compliance to those who do not deserve it. At a time when talking and conversation and dialogue is no longer possible, is no longer respected, the restraint of silence is meaningful and grants us a chance to summon a different trajectory and a different future. This different future is not about leadership with its loud cliches, but followership through its meaningful silence. And that's my second section of the day, followership. I've been reading very strongly about alternatives to leadership training, alternatives to leadership professional development. There is no doubt that leadership is everywhere. Everyone's a leader, and if they're not a leader, then they're on a waiting list for leadership training. Leadership is an issue, and yes, leadership is a problem. But leadership is not an identity. It's a set of behaviours and practices. Leadership must be a pathway towards something. To have a leader is to also have followers, and we require a strong theorisation of followership. Any leadership goal, mission or vision depends on the noun that's in fashion at a particular time. But that goal, mission or vision must be shared with followers, but it also must be believed by followers, or else nothing will actually happen. And of course, we've lived that failure. We've lived the failures of leadership in this century. So followers didn't follow and nothing got done. Nothing was changed. And we've lost belief in the notions of public good, public health, public education, public libraries, working with a community to make productive change. So let's talk about followership. It's a small word, a small literature, but it just may be integral to creating a better future. Even when followership is talked about, it is read through the lens of leadership. So let's disconnect these words for a little while. The word followership is not used in the leadership literature very much because other words are used like employees, workers, hired help, or the staff. Workplaces, though, are dominated by followers. They're not dominated by leaders, but leadership training remains the focus. And the word followership has a weird ring to it, like it sort of involves Tolkien. Most of us, most of the time, have to do what other people tell us to do. And yet, how this organisational culture operates, collapses, shrinks or dies is rarely discussed. If we can supposedly just get leadership right, then we and our institutions and our organisations will be successful. Well, we've seen in the last 25 years that that argument is completely wrong. When we think of followers, as Brown and Thornborough have shown in their very early article in the 1990s, we tend to think about passivity, low status, lack of responsibility, sheep, or being alienated. But I'm arguing today for the importance of followership, which requires the silence of leadership and the listening to alternatives, opinions, and trajectories. You see, becoming a follower is active. It's the result of decisions, and these decisions emerge through listening. Powerfully, Brown and Thornborough stated, quote, "Organisations do get the followers they deserve," end of quote. Therefore, if followership is neglected, there will be consequences. If followers are only studied or understood to understand leadership, then that will restrict and truncate our understanding of work, achievement, and indeed life. Robert Kelly is an international expert on followership through his remarkable book, The Power of Followership. And with followership added to an organisational vocabulary, the focus can be on active, independent critical thinkers who also build teams and innovative collaborations and achieve shared goals. James Maroussis used the great skill set for followers. He described the skill set as response abilities. Response abilities, 2 words. So to possess the ability to respond in a crisis, a necessity, a mission, or a goal. Followership captures an openness to learning, an openness to newness, a desire to be interactive, to share knowledge about a job and learn through reciprocal sharing. So the capacity of followers to adapt and build partnerships and collaborations at speed, they are the key skills of our time. Deep thinking has taken place, and this deep thinking is based on active listening, reflecting on the views and the approaches of others, building citizenship rather than hierarchies. Adaptability is the critical, crucial skill. Because of digitisation, because of accelerated modernity and globalisation, no leader could manage the speed of change, the rapid interpretations and decisions that are now required. So the capacity of followers to adapt and build partnerships and collaborations at speed, wow, they are the important skills of our time. The consequences of not understanding followership are, to be frank, we end up in our messy, disordered present of toxic, brittle leaders who create disconnected, disrespected followers who show up to get paid, have no interest in starting a workday or finishing it, they just turn up to earn some money. The assumption that a person has a destiny to be a leader. We have people who are born to lead, strong, confident, aggressive. The world, of course, has been filled up with these people, and their confidence is actually overconfidence, and their strength is bullying, and their aggression is toxic. And the notion that they were born to lead perpetuates the injustices of colonisation, race, age, class, gender, and indeed sexuality. If there is a reason why there has been so much loss of trust and faith in leaders, then it's caused because there has been a lack of attention on the creation of a communication context of honesty, self-awareness of strengths and limitations, empathy, organisational transparency, and the development of a thinking ear. Any diversity and any diverse views in an organisation come from the followers, not the leaders. So when we place attention on followers, we are all, as citizens as much as scholars, starting to understand, have a diagnostic of what has gone so very wrong in the last 25 years. You see, there is another way. And this was highlighted by Urbin, Riggio, Lowe and Karstein. They argued for a movement away from leader-centric organisations and moving to follower-centric organisations. What this phrase means is, hang on to yourself, followers construct leaders. Followers construct leadership. So without followership, leadership does not exist. Leadership is constructed through and by the followers. Barbara Kellerman used the following modelling, the taxonomy of followers. She had the isolates, who are detached, they don't care about leaders, they don't care about responses, they don't care about too much. Then we've got the bystanders, who observe but do not participate, and they make conscious decisions to disconnect. Then we have the participants. They are engaged, but they're either agreeing with or disagreeing with the leader, but they invest time and energy to make an impact, but that impact may be positive or negative. Then we have the activists, eager, energetic, engaged, and they're heavily invested in people and processes and policies. So this group can enact profound work for their leaders, or indeed undermine them at every turn. Then we have the diehards. These are the people prepared to die in the ditch for their views. They can be devoted to leaders, or they will cut their head off at the first opportunity. Their life is completely consumed by their views and their perspectives. So again, we can recognise so many characteristics in this model, in this taxonomy, either in ourselves or the people that we work with. But how do we move beyond these characteristics and tropes and create a better organisational culture and indeed a better society? When we place attention on followership, we as researchers, we as workers, have a new way to understand why particular outcomes emerge. Followership, therefore, is not a lesser role to leadership. It's not passive. It's not a preparation for leadership. It's not a way, and I'm going to use the dreadful phrase, it's not a way to manage up. It's not exclusive of leadership. The best leaders must remain followers. Followership is a way to think about power distribution, a way to think about work, and particularly what is meaningful in a workplace, and a way to create an inclusive workforce. But you see, it's also a way to diagnose incompetent leadership and a way to provide a context around leadership beyond personal ambition. Karuna Shankar Pandey stated that followers create executable power. Great phrase. So power itself does little except initiate fear and disconnection. But executable power demonstrates the importance of listening and thinking, and the importance of building relationships and communication systems between listening and thinking. So we've talked about Baudrillard. We've talked about the Baudrillard-inspired double refusal. The refusal to lead, the refusal to be led. Dreadful people in positions of leadership who have absolutely no idea what they're doing and use my bingo card to fill the space between leadership and followership with absolute rubbish. And because they are incompetent, the population turns away from them, disconnects, often with disgust. Most of us as citizens have disconnected from our leaders because we do not trust them. They are not credible, they are brittle, and they don't know what they're doing. So this situation of weak leaders is made even worse because weak leaders then put weak followers around them. Think the Peter Principle. To make a change in this absolutely disastrous situation, to get out of this double refusal, requires that all of us make different choices in our lives. Kurt Maiden described this role as the synergetic follower. This is a way to change the world. We have to live lives of integrity, honesty, trust, transparency, compassion, and openness. We have to commit to personal and professional development. We have to be courageous. We have to listen. We have to learn. We have to connect. We have to collaborate. Let's think about instead the models of leadership that are taught by the leadership industry. Transactional leadership, transformational leadership, charismatic leadership, and even authentic leadership is about a leader talking authentically about their identity to followers, like a data point of one actually matters. The only interventionist model is servant leadership. And this really has been the under-discussed star of the leadership literature from Robert Greenleaf, commencing in his work through the 1970s. To be a servant, we must listen, reflect, mirror, verify, confirm, and most importantly, we must care. We talk so often at the moment about being active, speaking up, being courageous, but my presentation today summons something different. The activity, the action of listening, learning, and silence. It is time for respect and reflection, listening and learning, followership and fearlessness. We have to remember that the choices that we make today, the choices that we make each day, matter. And I was thinking about the Byrds' great song from Easy Rider, Wasn't Born to Follow. Great track. No one is born to follow, just like no one is born to lead. We are made, not born. And we are here to make meaning. And it seems appropriate to finish not with the Byrds, but the man who wrote some of the hits and occasionally sung them with Roger McGuinn. Let's finish with Bob Dylan. All of us gotta serve somebody. Service has value. But you know what? We get to choose who we serve.